October 15th, 1933. On a cold Sunday morning inside a brick shed behind the Rolls-Royce works, engineers turn a switch. The prototype they call PV-12 coughs, then roars to life. Few realize it yet, but this 12-cylinder experiment will become the single most important aircraft engine of the Second World War. Britain in the early 1930s was flying on borrowed time. The RAF's frontline fighters, Gauntlets and Furies, were biplanes with open cockpits and radial engines, barely pushing 600 horsepower. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Germany's new Luftwaffe was secretly testing all-metal monoplanes. The Air Ministry's order was simple, but impossible. We need 1,000 horsepower. Rolls-Royce's managing director, Ernest Hives, decided to gamble. The ministry wouldn't fund development, so the company paid for it themselves. Hence the name, Private Venture 12. Chief engineer Arthur Rowledge, formerly of Napier, designer of the famous Lion racing engine, took the lead. He insisted on a liquid-cooled 60-degree V12 layout, compact, aerodynamic, and capable of sustained high RPM. Colleagues called it too delicate. Rowledge replied, "If it's built right, it will sing." The early runs were disastrous. Cylinder liners cracked, coolant leaked, bearings seized. But every failure taught them something. About metallurgy, tolerances, combustion. The breakthroughs came quietly. New high-silicon aluminum pistons, a stronger forged crankshaft, and most importantly, a centrifugal supercharger that forced pressurized air into the cylinders. By late 1935, the PV-12 finally held full power on the bench, 1,030 horsepower at 2,600 RPE. In 1936, the Air Ministry accepted it for production and gave it an official name. Rolls-Royce engines were named after birds of prey, so this one became the Merlin. That same year, the ministry issued specifications for 2 new fighters to use it, the Supermarine Type 300, later called the Spitfire, and the Hawker Type 300, which became the Hurricane. The Merlin wasn't ready, but neither were the planes. Together, they would grow into legends. At the Castle Bromwich and Derby test cells, the new engines screamed day and night. Mechanics measured exhaust flame color by eye. Failures were expected. The focus shifted from pure horsepower to altitude performance. Engineers added a 2-speed gearbox to the supercharger, so the pilot could switch impeller ratios mid-flight. Low gear for takeoff, high for thin air above 20,000 feet. It was an innovation no other air force yet had. September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. Within 48 hours, Britain and France declare war. At that moment, the Royal Air Force has just 1,900 aircraft, half of them already obsolete. The only truly modern fighters? A few hundred Hurricanes and fewer than 100 Spitfires, each powered by a new engine still being hand-built at Rolls-Royce Derby, the Merlin II. On paper, it was an engineering masterpiece. 1,030 horsepower, 27 litres of displacement, liquid-cooled aluminium alloy block, and that 2-speed supercharger giving unmatched climb performance. But in reality, it was fragile. Merlin IIs leaked oil, blew gaskets, and overheated in steep climbs. Every flight was a test flight. Yet the RAF had no alternative. They had to fight with what they had. When war broke out, Rolls-Royce expanded production overnight. The government nationalised shadow factories at Crewe, Glasgow and Manchester to build engines under licence. Women and teenagers were trained as precision machinists. Ernest Hives described it best. "The war won't be decided by generals. It'll be decided by pistons." By mid-1940, the factories were producing over 400 Merlins per month. Then came the crisis that would define the engine's legacy, the Battle of Britain. In July 1940, the Luftwaffe began daily raids over the English Channel. The outcome would determine whether Britain stood or fell. The Merlin wasn't just another engine now. It was the difference between life and death at 20,000 feet. The Hurricane, rugged and stable, handled the bulk of interceptions. The Spitfire, sleek and fast, handled the German escorts, the Messerschmitt Bf-109s. Both depended on the Merlin's power curve and reliability. The 109's Daimler-Benz engine used fuel injection. It could dive inverted without cutting out. The Merlin used carburetors. When Spitfires dived sharply, fuel sloshed away from the jets, choking the engine for a split second. That half second could mean the difference between a kill or never coming home. It was an English engineer, Beatrice Tilly Schilling, who fixed it. She designed a tiny brass restrictor, nicknamed Tilly's Orifice, that prevented the carburetors from flooding during dives. It was crude but brilliant. Within weeks it was fitted to every Spitfire and Hurricane in fighter command. The pilots called her invention a lifesaver. By September 1940, the Luftwaffe threw everything it had at London and the southern coast. Over 1,400 sorties in a single day. Spitfires scrambled with barely cooled engines. Ground crews refueled and rearmed them in minutes. In those weeks, Merlin engines ran at emergency power so often that mechanics said they could tell which squadron a plane came from by the color of its exhaust stains. Out of 1,715 RAF fighters destroyed that summer, most went down fighting with Merlin engines still running. When the battle finally ended in October 1940, Britain still stood. The Luftwaffe had lost over 1,700 aircraft. Fighter command, against every prediction, had survived. And the Merlin's reputation was sealed. One RAF mechanic put it best: "The Spitfire gets the glory. The Merlin does the work." January 1941. The Blitz still pounds London. Britain's factories are running 24 hours a day, but they're running out of men, metal, and time. The Merlin has proved itself, but demand is greater than the island can supply. So Ernest Hives makes a decision that will change everything. He ships the Merlin's blueprints across the Atlantic. In Washington, the U.S. Army Air Forces assigned the project to Packard Motor Company of Detroit. Packard builds luxury cars, precision, not production. Now they're asked to mass-produce a 1,500-part masterpiece to tolerances the size of a human hair. Rolls-Royce sends 40 crates of tooling, and a handful of engineers sail on a convoy through U-boat waters to teach the Americans every secret. The Americans find the drawings baffling. British threads, metric bolts, and notes scribbled in pencil. They redraw the entire engine from scratch, converting every dimension into inches, simplifying the castings, and introducing mass production jigs. The result is the Packard V1650 Merlin, built in Detroit, interchangeable with its British twin, down to the last gasket. Meanwhile, another problem haunts the skies over Europe. Allied bombers can reach Germany, but their fighter escorts can't. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38s run out of range over Belgium. Every mission beyond that means thousands of bombers flying unprotected. Losses mount. Morale collapses. The Allies need a miracle. A fighter that can fly to Berlin and back. North American aviation had built a sleek new airframe called the P-51 Mustang, powered by an Allison V-1710 engine. It was fast at low altitude, but choked above 15,000 feet. In April 1942, a British test pilot named Ronald Harker wrote a simple report to the Air Fighting Development Unit. The Mustang with a Merlin 61 would be outstanding. That note started one of the most consequential engine swaps in history. It was the perfect transatlantic partnership. British design, American manufacturing, Allied purpose. By the end of 1943, Packard's Detroit line was turning out 15 Merlin engines a day. Every one was test run for 90 minutes before shipping. The Merlin had become more than an engine. It was a bridge, built from necessity, powered by precision, and soon to decide the war in the air. January 1944. Across England's frozen airfields, silver Mustangs line the runways, each one powered by a Detroit-built Merlin. When their throttles open, the roar rolls across the countryside like a storm. Inside those cockpits are young men who will fly deeper into enemy territory than any Allied pilot before them. By late 1944, Rolls-Royce and Packard together were producing nearly 1,000 Merlins a week. Each engine required over 10,000 individual parts and 350 man-hours of labor. At its peak, a Merlin left a factory somewhere in Britain or America every 6 minutes. They were flown to frontline depots in wooden crates marked only RR, handle with care. But its story didn't end there. After the war, surplus Merlins found new homes in crop dusters, air racers, and speed record cars on the Bonneville salt flats. Pilots said you could always tell a Merlin by ear, not just by its volume, but by its rhythm. 12 cylinders firing in perfect harmony, a mechanical heartbeat from another era. From 1933 to 1945, the Merlin carried Britain from vulnerability to victory. It turned desperation into dominance. And though most who lived through it never saw the engine itself, they heard its song, above the Channel, above Berlin, above the noise of a world at war. The Spitfire, the Hurricane, the Lancaster, the Mustang. 4 legends, 1 heart. The Rolls-Royce Merlin. The engine that changed the sky forever, even if nobody knew it existed.